The construct of blackness, African Americans and the American identity. What does it mean to be black in America? For centuries, African Americans have grappled with a complex identity shaped not by heritage alone, but by the unique history of slavery, systemic oppression, and cultural reinvention in the United States. Often, this identity is mistakenly linked directly to African culture, yet the truth reveals a more nuanced story. Blackness, as we know it today, is a construct born out of America's need to define, classify, and control. It is a narrative rooted in survival, resilience, and transformation, distinct from the African traditions that were forcibly left behind. To understand this evolution, we must examine the historical forces that severed African Americans from their ancestral roots, the culture they built in response, and the ongoing tension between heritage and identity. The construct of blackness. Blackness, as many understand it today, is not an ancient inheritance but an American construct. This identity, shaped by centuries of systemic oppression and cultural reinvention, began in the brutal fires of slavery. Unlike their African ancestors, African Americans were stripped of their languages, religions, and traditions. What emerged from this cultural erasure was not an extension of Africa, but a new identity entirely rooted in the United States. When enslaved Africans were brought to America, they were forcibly separated from their families, tribes, and communities. The slave trade's violence extended beyond physical suffering. It dismantled the very core of cultural identity. African names were replaced with Christian ones, languages were suppressed, and religious practices were forbidden. Historian Violet M. Showers Johnson described this process as denaturing, a psychological and cultural disconnection that severed African Americans from their ancestral heritage, the birth of a distinct culture. Over centuries, African Americans created their own culture, born of resilience and survival. Christian hymns and spirituals rooted in African traditions gave birth to new forms of expression, carrying the voices of the enslaved and their hopes for liberation. These early songs evolved over time into jazz, blues, gospel, folk, country, bluegrass, and rock and roll, genres that would profoundly shape the music of America. From the raw emotional intensity of the blues to the rhythmic complexity of jazz and the spiritual energy of gospel, these musical forms came to embody the struggles and triumphs of African Americans. Moreover, the influence of African American music stretched beyond the confines of these genres, seeping into the very foundation of American folk, country, and bluegrass. Many of these styles, originally rooted in African American traditions, would become key components of the broader musical landscape. Artists like Robert Johnson and Sister Rosetta Tharpe bridged cultural divides, showing how black musical innovation shaped the very fabric of American music. By the mid-20th century, rock and roll emerged as another genre heavily influenced by the African American experience. Legends like Chuck Berry and Little Richard brought rhythms and sensibilities from blues and gospel into mainstream pop culture, establishing rock as one of the most important genres in modern music. Each of these musical forms reflects the unique African American experience, one that was both shaped by and transcended the racial and cultural boundaries of America. The divide between African and African American identities. Today, the social distance between African Americans and Africans highlights the profound effects of this historical disconnection. African immigrants often arrive in the United States with intact cultural identities, distinct languages, and practices. Many struggle to understand the African American experience, shaped as it is by centuries of systemic racism and oppression. Similarly, African Americans may view Africa through an idealized lens or as a place of historical loss, further complicating any sense of belonging. As Professor Iheduru notes, these dynamics reflect both a cultural gulf and a competition for social resources in America, deepening the divide. Heritage or identity. For some African Americans, embracing an African identity feels like reclaiming a piece of what was stolen. Yet for others, it feels distant and disconnected, as if African culture belongs to a history that is no longer theirs. Scholar Michael Gomez argues that African Americans exist in a double consciousness, torn between their historical roots and their lived realities in America. This duality underscores the complexity of identity. African Americans are not displaced Africans, but a new cultural group entirely born of the American experience.